Broadcasting from the commodity capital of the world, Zurich, Switzerland, this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
Insider's Guide to Energy, ETRM mini-series, brought to you by Fidectus, where post-trading matters, and Falls and independent management and consulting boutique, creating impacts for clients and markets.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy, ETRM educational miniseries. This week, we are excited to bring with us to this episode Previse Systems, and from Previse with Asbjørn Hansen. Asbjørn, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Hi, Chris. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
And fantastic to have you. And of course, I have my co-host Martin Hiller with me as well. I neglected to introduce him, but we have both you. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk ETRM. And before we get into it, I think we should start fairly high level. I've done this with all our previous guests. And everybody going on, we want to get your industry perspective. So from my perspective, the ETRM space is crowded. That's one of the things that made me wake up one day and say, hey, let's do an ETRM educational mini series. I see a lot of smoke. I see money. I see companies trying to reinvent themselves. I see new companies coming out. And so what I want to ask you to start the show is, first, what's happening in the industry? What's going on there? Why so much noise?
Well, I think there's multiple reasons for the noise, right? One part of it is that you have, even though the market's a bit crowded, right, you have certain vendors who's pretty much building up large monopolies, right? So that's one side of things, right, where a lot of products are now in the same hat, right? So at the end of the day, you have less vendors out there, right? But you have the other side of it, which is many small startups like ourselves, right, who's starting up and then saying, well, actually, there's a space here and there's a lot of value we can bring to the marketplace, right? So when you combine that with a market from our customers' perspective, right, which is very volatile, right, has a lot of market volatility this year, a lot of crazy prices, right, which means that a lot of different areas of the market are suddenly changing dramatically, right? I was just on the phone before this podcast with somebody in the Nordics who's basically saying that there's no liquidity left in the markets up there, and people are trying to struggle with that and have to find new ways of getting price information, new ways of trading, right? And similarly, you see the price moves around Europe this summer and this autumn, right, where a lot of the OTC trading is pretty much dying out a little bit because of that, right? And people's credit limits are being hit and moving things to exchanges, but then cash and margin call becomes a problem for people, right? So a lot of people are kind of struggling and trying to figure out how do they, utilize the cash they have in the best possible way, right? How do you trade around the assets you have in a better and less cash-consuming way, because of course this is something that will hit everybody at the moment, and systems is kind of one of the best way to address that problem, right?
So, Asbjørn, I heard you saying that on the one hand there is more like a monopolistic structure in the market if you look at the vendors, but you also mentioned that there are more startups coming up with new ideas. So why is there this movement that there are more startups coming up? Is it because of the monopolistic structure, or is it because the clients really require maybe new technology or new business functionality that monopolistic structures or companies cannot provide?
Well, I think it's more technology actually driving at the moment, right? So a lot of people are looking for new technology, right? And technology is required to meet the market we are in today, right? So if you look at a lot of the legacy systems that were built at a time where you traded very little, you did big, large trades. Now you're in a market where algos are driving things, right? People are trading very, very high pace and a lot of small transactions, right? Which means the systems you're using needs a different footprint, right? It's a different problem to solve, right? If you have, a few hundred, a few thousand large long-term deals, that's kind of one problem to solve, right? If you have, 15 million short-term deals, it's kind of a different problem. You need different technology, right? You can't use the same shovel to dig the hole, right? It's two different things. So trying to find good ways of applying technology to do both and basically separate, two different problems you're trying to solve in one package is a big thing here.
Okay, and how does, from your point of view, Previse fit in that sense? I mean, obviously you're also more young and startup driven company. But tell us more about your solution in that context when it comes to technology and what you can offer to the clients.
Yeah, so we started from more of a renewable standpoint, right? And decided to say, okay, let's build something around GOs first, with something where nobody had a solution for that, we believe, right? Then we took PPAs, and then we built our way back into the normal, more classical trading software from there, right? We kind of building our products on 4 different building blocks, right? So one thing is performance and scalability, right? So that's really about using technology to scale things up and looking at, trade captures in milliseconds, not anything above that, right? Valuations is in milliseconds as well, right? We, at the moment we have a target to be able to capture trades on average at 200 milliseconds per trade, and we want to be able to have real-time positions in around 500 milliseconds, right? And we're a good way to get there. So that's one thing. That's what we need for the algos to work and for the system to actually add that additional value and give our customers a competitive edge, right? Then usability, right, is another thing, right? Where a lot of the legacy systems were built 20 years ago with UIs and things that came from that era. And we've seen a lot of places where people spend a lot of money putting in systems, but the system adoption is very low because the users can't find their way around. The system's too complex to operate, right? So building usability into the software is key, right? Fast deployment is really something that we also spend a lot of time on fixing. We're doing something right now where we signed a contract with a new large company the other week, and they will go into parallel run next week, I believe. So by being able to put the software in very, very quickly and actually scaling to other markets very, very quickly without having to do much configuration, much deployment is key, right? And the last thing is basically automation, right? So system automation is the last thing that everybody needs to be able to handle the high frequency of trades.
So it sounds like Previse started meeting a need or looking at new and emerging technologies coming in. You said you just landed a new large customer. So this is a gray field, though, right? It's not a greenfield play. So how do you get a transition? If you're a large trader and you have infrastructure in place, how do you convince, or how even if you're a quick deployment, how do you convince them to make that move? Or are they willing to make the move, or they only do it for part of their portfolio? How does a company like Previse get into a large
We typically
energy
do
trader
it
that's
for part of the
established?
Yes, we typically do it for part of the portfolio and do it in smaller steps, right? So these big bang projects that was part of energy ETRM back in the past, right? And there's loads of horror stories about that requires a whole bar conversation. But those big projects, I think that's the past now, right? Nobody's going to do that anymore. Everybody knows how expensive that gets and how big the risks are and those things, right? So we always try to focus on smaller areas of the portfolio and then try to work with the customers to basically build a landscape where you can plug in and plug out systems, right? So it's not enough to have one solution that does everything. You're never going to get the right solution for that anyways, right? So being able to pick out different solutions for different parts of your portfolio, and then having an overview built with technology as well, of course, where you have event-driven trades being pushed across the different systems into a consolidated picture is a much better way for the customers to drive their business, I believe, right? So that gives you the flexibility you need to choose different tools for different things, and at the same time, a consolidated view across it, right? And I think a lot of the customers we talk to are using a lot of new technology as well in that space, right? Something like Snowflake and those sort of more modern data warehouse approaches, which allows you to basically plug in different systems that way. And I think if you start looking at your landscape from that perspective, it's much easier to scale out and utilize different tools and say, you actually, maybe tomorrow you start trading metals or you have grains or you have LNG or whatever in your portfolio. And when you look at that, it might be different solutions that is the best solution for those products, right? And that's kind of how we get in there normally.
So how old is your company?
We started coding in November 2019. We had the first customer go live in July 20.
And then where's your development done? What countries do you develop in?
Well, we have a core team in Switzerland, so that's mainly the core team and our product management group that sits here, right? Then we have quite a few different contractors in various places. We have a few people in the UK. We have a contractor in Bulgaria and a set of people in Romania as well. So what we're trying to do is space it out and use different people for different things, right? So the core team who does all the framework and all the high performance things sit very closely together here, right? And then we have a lot of CRUD APIs and UI things, which we typically outsource to other people. Say, look, here's our spec, go build this and bring it back to us, right? Because otherwise the cost effectiveness is not really there, right? So it's a way of using nearshoring to get a better cost effectiveness for our development cost, right?
Cool.
Thanks, Asbjørn. But let's move maybe a bit content-wise to a topic that you mentioned already at the beginning, renewables. I think it's worth talking about it a bit more in detail because this is really what the industry is currently to a big extent driving. So from your point of view, how important is the energy transition for your clients, and what do you specifically offer to manage this transition? I think you've mentioned already that you grew from that
Yeah.
direction, but maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that, on your view.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, the thing about us is we actually only have renewable portfolios at the moment on with our customers, right? Even the next on your side is also a big renewable producer, right? So we started out from PPAs, from GOs, and said, well, first of all, because we believe that's the future, right? And being able to track your renewable production is crucially important for people, right? And we think it goes on both sides, both on the producer side, but also from the buyer side. There's a whole market there of consumers of energy who's currently, from my point of view, a bit untapped, right? Who doesn't really realize that they actually need to manage their positions. Same thing goes with CO2 and so on and so forth, right? Where people, as long as the price was very low, nobody really cared. But now that the price is very high, suddenly it becomes much more important for people to actually look at what they're doing, right? So we started out with that. We built our system around that from the get-go, right? So while we designed things around kind of the Acer structures of trades, the CPML scheme and those sort of things, we basically focused on GOs first, right? Then PPAs, and then from there into as I said, into the more classical power and gas portfolio, right? So that's how we're looking at that. Of course, the volatility that it brings makes it more important, right, to manage this well, right? Both on a longer term position with the PPAs, but also the short term volatility that comes out of the leftovers in your portfolio, right? That you need to trade on a very short term basis.
Okay, understood. So understood that basically you started out on GOs and PPAs, but maybe tell us a bit more from your client's point of view. What does it make so, or what does PPA and GOs make so special or maybe complex? Is it like the capturing of the trades with all the attributes? Is it the pricing, the valuation, the risk management? I guess it's more than just one topic, but maybe you can elaborate
Yeah,
a bit on the challenges and what you offer
sure.
as Previse.
Yeah, sure. We start with the GOs first, maybe, right? Because that's kind of the funniest one, at least my view, right? Because what we see there is that people have, GO is not just a GO, right? You have all these different labels that goes with the trades, right? So somebody wants a GO from a newly built wind park, right? And they'll pay extra for that. Other people want to have a GO that looks at a pretty site, or doesn't kill salmon, doesn't kill birds, whatever it is that the label guarantees on the GO, means that it becomes a very intransparent market, right? There's a big bid-ask spread in this market, from what I see at least, where you might go and trade generic GOs on more structured platforms, right? But a lot of the OTC, most of it is OTC trading, right? And a lot of that is really about finding buyers who's willing to pay extra from hydropower done locally, close to where their customers are, or for wind power done from a specific area with a specific eco label, right? So basically being able to capture that, and then being able to match up, right, to take advantage of the bid-ask spread that this brings, and this complexity of the contracts bring, right? Actually, not so much the contract, more the demand-driven complexity, right? That gives us that. That's one thing. That's really something that, especially our GO customers, spend a lot of time with us building into the software from the get-go, so they can capture these things and try to optimize how do I do that. And at the same time, since the GOs expire within a year, right? You need to make sure you want to always use the oldest first, and all these sort of logical pieces that you need to put into your software, right? So that's kind of one area, right? On the PPA side, it's more that, of course, PPAs are typically long-term deals, right? With long-term times and stuff, and that's not so different from what it was in the past. But every PPA have some sort of its own logic attached to it, right? They are typically quite complex agreements, right, with all kind of additional things. And what we offer for that is we have a core PPA solution, right? But since every agreement might be a little bit different, we built our software in a way where everything is accessible via our ecosystem and via our app store, so that people can build additional functionality just for the specific contract into the software and have it execute seamlessly, right? So you don't have to go outside and do the calculation and put it back in. You can actually build your own little app for this specific contract and do those calculations. Stuff like profit sharing or whatever it is in these PPA contracts, right, is always hard to model from a generic standpoint. And each agreement might have differences, right?
Okay, so what I understood from your view is that on the one hand, more complex deal structures for GOs and PPAs makes it difficult or more difficult than usual for your clients to capture trades, but also the whole topic deal life cycle for those kind of structured trades is then more challenging, and maybe in that context, because I think that's at least something that I can see that is challenging for clients. The whole topic, pricing or valuation of PPAs, and also then risk management of existing PPAs in their portfolios. I can see that this is not, since it's structured trades, something that you easily do. So my question to you is, do you provide a pricing and risk management model, or do you more follow as of now the approach? Okay, I heard you saying App Store, that you say to your clients, here we have an App Store, we open up our platform for you to develop your own pricing models, or maybe you have a partner that provides you an app for pricing and
Yeah, yeah.
risk management.
It also depends on where you are, right? If you're pre-trade or post-trade, right? I think there's two
Yeah,
very different things,
yeah.
right? So we focus mainly on post-trade, right? So the whole pre-trade part, there's lots of vendors out there who does very well, like Curious and others, Pixel and so forth, who all does these pre-trade things, right? Which is one problem to solve, right? And then we are more on the post-trade part, right? We're basically looking at, okay, now that you've done the trade, how do you value it now, and how do you manage the risk and the different elements of this agreement, right? So what we offer, of course, is the ability to capture such a trade, being able to capture all the different constraints that are built into the trade, right? Being able to capture price formulas and attach it to the trade if that's the case, right? But at the same time, and of course, run normal mark to market and those sort of things around the PPAs. That's basic bread and butter stuff, right? But at the same time, if you need more complex optimizations across it, right, then allowing people to build that with via the ecosystem, right, allowing people to add their own functionality or hook in other vendors who have more deep risk management expertise than we do, right? So we're not trying to be the end all be all, right? We actually believe very firmly that we should focus on the main ETRM part and let people who are more specialists in different areas build their own apps for that, right? So we don't want to build nomination solutions, for example. We're not going to follow the nomination market very much. We're not going to build quantitative analysis solutions. We don't have the expertise in that, right? There's other companies out there who's way better at that and who should provide those things as apps on our platform rather than us spending time on it, right? Because that will give the customers a better solution and hopefully a competitive edge rather than us trying to spread too wide, right? I think at least what I've seen in the past is that a lot of vendors try to build everything, right? And if you try to build everything, you end up doing nothing really well. So try to focus on what's actually really good for the main product and for the customers is important to us, right? And then have partners build the rest.
So you talk about ecosystem. You mentioned that your customers might want to build something or use a third party. Let's maybe dive a little bit deeper into how that would work and describe your ecosystem. And let's go down the two approaches: whether they build it themselves or whether there's third parties that you said that you'd like to have them involved. Can you explain how that works for your environment?
Yeah, so the way it works is basically we have a kind of an app framework where people can sign up for, right, and go in and build their stuff, right. There's kind of two options to do it. They can either build things using our existing stack, right, so basically using Azure functions and those sort of things, C# code, right, and utilize all of the nuggets that we already have. It's basically an SDK, right, where you have all the framework we've already built and all the tools and functions we have built already that you can go utilize. So you don't have to invent your own stuff around daylight savings or time zone handling and all that sort of stuff, right? You can utilize all that from our software, right? So that's one way, and that way you can go build it and apply it as an app for yourself. Keep it completely private so nobody else can use it. That's your app. Or you could say, actually, I want to resell this via the App Store, right? And in that case, you package it up. It goes through some review on our side in that case, right? Before it then gets applied to the App Store and other people can buy it, right? So that goes for both partners and for customers, right? So some customers are keen on building their own apps and are building them and keeping them in-house so that they get their own proprietary information. That's especially around optimization and those sort of things. Others are looking more for, especially interfaces, right? Going, let's get a third party to build this interface to get prices in from Bloomberg or Reuters or whatever, right? There's no reason for me to build that knowledge in house, then we get it off the shelf and get a partner to build it, and then we sell it on the platform, right? So I just pay a monthly fee for the interface, and that's it.
So having an open platform where clients can build their own plats sounds definitely a new approach and a new direction to walk on. So in that context, how many apps, if you can tell us this, how many apps do currently exist beside probably the basic platform that you need in any case? And how many are maybe
Well, I think,
provided by clients, third
yeah.
party?
So let me try to do a count in my head here, right? So that's a bit the hard question. So there's about 7 with one client, of which 4 are built from the outside. 3 are built by us as apps, right? So that's one client. Another client has 3 at the moment. Two built from third party vendors, 1 built by us, and 1 has God knows how many, 10, 15. A lot of them built on their own. So it's very different for different customers, right?
Okay.
What they're looking for. Right? What we try to do, of course, is to standardize this a lot more. So as we get more and more customers, it becomes easier and easier to onboard and just go and pick and choose the apps you want from the ecosystem, right? Rather than
Yeah,
having to go and
makes sense.
reinvent the wheel, right? So
Yeah. And who is doing the maintenance of apps once they are built?
the vendor who produced it, right? So if the customer builds his
Okay.
own app, then he's of course responsible for doing that, right? If a third party develops the app and delivers it, that party normally does the maintenance support as well, right? So we, in order to make sure that it always works, right, we version our APIs, right? So
Okay.
even if we change our API, the partner's app should not break, and they typically have 6 to 12 months, depending on what it is, to move to the new version of the API instead before we then deprecate the old one, right? So that they can continue to use the apps that they build without having breaking changes all the time every time
Yeah.
we change something, right? Because obviously at the moment we've got about 15, 20 people pushing in code on a daily basis, right? And of course, the amount of change coming into the platform is relatively high. Let's say that, and so therefore versioning the APIs is of course very important for this.
Yeah, understandable. Maybe last question on the topic. So, who is then doing the pricing for an app? Is it then with the client who builds it, with the vendor,
With
or
the
how does
vendor,
that work?
with the vendor, right? So the vendor can set
Okay.
their own price. We don't get involved with that at all, right? So we just take a fee if they sell it via our app store, right? Other than that, it's up to them with how they price it. So there's various different models, right? Some are pricing it monthly fee, some yearly fee, some based on per price index or per trade or whatever it is. It depends on the vendor, right?
Okay.
So you mentioned earlier in your description of when you started the partner ecosystem, I think you said the word Azure. So I think you implied cloud somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Tell us what your cloud strategy is.
Well, we're cloud only, so that's basically the strategy, right? So we designed everything in the cloud from the get go, right? We decided, when we looked at this up front and we looked at that and thought, okay, let's just build a full cloud native solution, and that's what we've done, right? So of course we can deploy it into a private cloud, but the main strategy is to have a multi-tenant solution where people can utilize the same Azure cloud, right? So everything is built that way. From the get-go. Also in collaboration with Microsoft, we're working with them as a partner as well, and it's been quite intriguing to see how much you can actually do utilizing the technology that they provide. Right? We started not so long ago using Azure Batch, for example, to do computations, right, and do very large portfolios of trades in very very little time. Simply because of the computational power, you can scale up and scale down as you need, right? And that's definitely something that the classical on-premise solutions just couldn't do, right? Not without having a huge data center and a huge cost to run it. This is way more cost effective.
So do you consider cloud normal today? Is that mainstream today, or is it still on the front end of the curve for some traders?
It depends on which market segment you're talking about, right? If you're talking to some of the major traders, right, it's very much cloud is the way forward, right? If you talk to some of the classical statworkers, that's very little cloud in there, right? And then we have a few cases where mainly Russian companies are basically saying, well, actually, cloud is great, but they want nowhere near any US focused cloud, right? Which is kind of interesting as well, but it kind of makes sense as well, right? So, but other than that, I think everybody is moving towards cloud, and cloud will be where we go, right? And the one thing it does for us as well, which is very different than the classical solutions, right, is that we do continuous release, right? So we release software into production this week 4 times so far, right? And of course, that is a big differentiator, right? Because it means you have no upgrades. right? So being able to continuously release new instruments, new product into production for everybody is a big gain for everybody, and gives us this, as talked about earlier, the faster time to market, right? It gives us exactly that edge, right? So if there's a new instrument on the EX, well, we can have it in the software next day, right?
So
And that's of course a big gain.
So I'm familiar with agile, which usually is sprints. So I'm not so familiar with continuous release. Maybe you could educate me a little bit.
Sure. Well, basically, what we do is we take whatever sort of feature, function, or defect, or whatever it is, right? We build it, pass it through QA and the beta, run a beta testing before we then push it into production, right? So each feature and function gets released independently, pretty much, right? Of course, there are some cases where we have to release multiple things together because it goes cross component, right? But most of the time, we can release a lot of fixes independently. We also do it under something called feature flags, which basically means that we release code into production but not turn it on. So production will continue to run with the same code base for a few days before we then switch on the flag, which starts executing the new code. So that if something goes wrong, we can turn the flag off again pretty quickly, right? And have the old solution running, right? And those are some of the things we've been doing. We also do that for customers. We're saying, actually, let's release a new feature. We think it's going to add value to everybody. We'll build it, we'll release it we'll turn it on for one customer only. They'll go test it and use it. When they're happy with it, we'll then go and turn it on for everybody else, right? So by being able to release code that way, it gives us huge advantages compared to the more classical approaches, right?
Understood. Okay. But how does it work then? Or how do you manage the dependencies to vendors that code own apps and might also have a new version of an app and want to release that? I guess that you have quite some quality assurance mechanism in place in order to prevent that the release of an app might crash down the whole system. So how does that work?
Yeah, well, it works the way that each app can't really crash down the whole system, right? There's some safety features built into the framework for that, of course, right? But each app vendor has their own release pipeline, and can essentially release fixes or changes to their pipeline similar to what we do, right? What they can't change is the kind of the edge of it, right? So and then there's also, of course, how many times can you hit an API and those sort of things, right? There's safeties built into that, right? So you can't go bananas by mistake, right? And that's what we've done to ensure that. But actually, the QA on the apps themselves relies with the vendor, right? So if the vendor builds an app, we need to, of course, ensure that our platform is secure and fine. And but the QA of their app is with the vendor, right? They have to QA their own app and release it out, and they can feature flag whatever they want as well, right?
Okay.
So that's one way of doing it, right? And we've also just got a lot of work around around other ways of releasing stuff, where people are basically putting into Docker containers. So basically, you write your code in Python or whatever, and you place a Docker container in with our software, right? And then that way, you can keep your stuff completely private and completely away from us. We can't even see the code, right? So if you're releasing stuff just for yourself, you can do it that way and then hit the API from that sort of approach, right? Again, same thing applies though, right? Since we can't see your code, we can't do anything with it. You're responsible for what it does, right?
Okay, so maybe last question, that maybe also a very technical question. So it sounds to me a bit like your setup in terms of development framework is programming language agnostic, so the client can or the vendor can code in any programming language, but you deploy then on your platform via the deployment pipeline. So that's very flexible to the client, and every client has a deployment pipeline that he can
Yes.
use. Okay.
Exactly. He can use, if he's an app vendor, right? He gets his own deployment pipeline for his apps, right? And so of course the core stack on our side, of course, it's not agnostic. We use Azure Functions, Azure Batch, and those sort of things, C#, right? But if somebody wants to write in Python or whatever, they can put that into a Docker container and deploy it that way. That's perfectly fine with us, right? We just can't resell it on the platform because in that model we have no way of verifying what that app is doing, right? Because we can't see into the code.
Understood. Okay. Maybe coming a bit back to the whole topic, ecosystems. So do you also have partners that you cooperate with that might provide a service or an app that they have already? And I mean, that requires often quite some interfacing. So how do you approach that whole topic, partnerships in terms of ecosystem?
Yeah, well, as I said in the beginning, right? Our philosophy has always been that we don't want to build everything, right? We want other people to build it, especially if they have more expertise than we do, right? Then they can build a better solution. So we work with partners all over the place, right? I normally jokingly say to people that we're in bed with everybody. But that's basically what we try to do, right? If there's a partner out there, a company out there who knows more about certain things than we do, then we should involve those, get those guys to build an app rather than us trying to build it ourselves, right? It gives a better solution. Same with we have it different ways, right? We have kind of consultant partners, right? So doing implementations with us, right? We have development partners, and then we have kind of complementary products, right? Like Videxis is a good example of a complementary product, right? Where it's a solution that adds value to our customers in addition to what we do. So of course, let's work together and let's build interface and things so that the customers can get more value of the overall solution, even though it's not our solution everywhere. The solution for the customer consists of multiple pieces, right? And I think that's how it has to be.
So you've got this ecosystem there. You mentioned partners in consulting, perhaps. So what's your support and implementation model? How do you support this?
Well, at the moment, since we're still very small, right, we do most of our implementations ourselves. We have started involving various partners and trying to train up their resources to do implementation for us, because our strategy has always been that we don't want to build a big implementation practice, right? That's not what we want to do. We want to focus on the software. However, this is our fourth customer now, right? So as we grow, we try to train our people for them to go do the implementation going forward, right? And that's what we will do there, right? On the support side, we've built in a lot of stuff into our stack, right? Around using application insights and other tools to basically proactively find problems and try to address them before customers see them, right? That's what we're trying to do there. And again, we can do that because we have kind of live view of what's going on, right? Since it's all running in the cloud. Something we couldn't do had it been on premise, right? We would have to wait and let the customer log a ticket and go analyze. We might not have the data and all the sort of stuff that creates slow resolution of problems, right?
And so you're proactively trying to pre-identify a problem and address it. So is there uptime or something associated with the history? So you've been around for some period of time. You've got a number of customers on your system. How does that translate to performance and uptime?
Well, the only time anything's been down is if Microsoft had a problem with their Active Directory, which they had like once earlier this year, right? Where basically the entire Azure Active Directory was down. And of course, in that case, we also, our system was actually not down because nobody could get to it, which is in itself a problem, right? But other than that, we actually don't see downtime really. We see downtime still with deployments when we deploy new code. There are cases still where it takes us a bit too long to deploy new code, so we have to let customers know that they have to be down for a little bit. But we're working on that as well to get it to, with the vision to get it to a continuous release with no downtime whatsoever, right? That's at least what we're trying to achieve, right? So that we can do that without having downtime for the customers at all. And you need that for continuous trading, right? So.
Okay. Maybe back again to the topic integration roadmap that Chris just mentioned. What I'm wondering is, and what I can also see in project that I'm on, is that usually when you start integrating a new solution, especially cloud native solution, you need to think well about the whole architectural design and make architectural decisions. So which systems to connect, where you need to build interfaces, etc., etc. So is that something that you leave to the client, or is that something you really can assist also with your know-how and work out architectural designs with him?
We can only support it, right? We need cloud architects and things to do that, right? And it depends on the customer's infrastructure and their appetite and so on and so forth, right? So for that, we work with partners, right? We're not going to go in and take over customers' infrastructure and run that, right? We're not experts on that. We're expert on building ETRM software, not generic cloud architecture across multiple systems, right? So typically we would try to find a partner to help do that for the customer rather than do that ourselves. I think other people can do that way better than we can.
Okay. Chris, something to add on the whole topic ecosystems and cloud from your point of view? If not, I have another interesting topic that we might talk about.
Let's move on. I think we've
got great. Covered. So Asbjørn, automation, you have mentioned it already at the beginning. That's definitely something that drives the industry. You also mentioned some buzzwords like algo trading. I think I heard out of that. So especially in terms of algo trading, let's start with that maybe. Do you provide already some apps or some functionality that enables the client to maybe build their own strategies, to run them? Maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that.
Yeah, so again, right? Algos is typically something you don't want to share your algos with anybody else, typically, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that for us becomes a kind of a private app, right? Because that's your main money maker, right? For those sort of firms, right? So what we try to do is provide the data as quickly as possible and let the customer subscribe to trades and positions as they change and as they come in, right? So rather than you having to go and run the process every time, we build an event-based solution, which basically, whenever a new trade hits the API, the main position part of that gets put onto a service bus essentially, where you can listen to these events and get the positions, pulled or pushed into your real-time solution, which then triggers the algo to recalculate and go re-put out new orders, right? So we built it that way intentionally so we could get as much performance as possible to the algos, right? So while we don't provide algos ourselves and never will, right? Again, as I said before, that's not something we're great at, right? Other people are much better at that, and typically people don't want to share it anyways. So we want to provide the position so quickly that the algo could get an advantage and go out and create new orders and new things based on new signal they got, right?
So you mentioned 500 millisecond, I think, or like half a second, maybe. Is that what you were saying? Your
Yeah,
settlement time.
500 milliseconds, yeah, half a second, yeah.
So for a human, that sounds quick. That still sounds incredibly slow to me for a computer and processing. What takes so long?
Well, if you go through it, right, the first thing is you need to just validate that this trade is actually valid and the data you got is valid, right? So you have to validate at least the position relevant part of the trade, right? So the way we're doing it is basically breaking it out into two different parts, right? Before we send out the event. So one part is the position relevant field, like which time frame is it for, what the quantity, price, those sort of things, right? That's what's important for our position, right? So we'll go and validate that first. When that's validated, we will persist the trade. We'll then send out an event, which is the position relevant part, right? Goes into the engine, then gets valued against the current price curve, right? Which might also be real time. And if you multiply all this together, then half a second is about what we can get to at the moment with the stack we've built so far. Actually,
How does that stack up in the market? So what are other people able to do? Is a half a second something you're very proud of and you're wearing it out front saying that's
we're pretty proud of that? Yeah, we're pretty proud of that. Yes, it's pretty good actually, right? From our point of view, it's pretty nice. And as I said before, we're not quite there yet. We are getting very close to it, but that's at least the target we set out to do from the beginning, right? So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting close to it, and I don't think anybody's nowhere near, right? So we worked with one of our customers who spent a lot of time before they selected us to look at everybody else out there, and basically their finding was that they couldn't really find any classical ETRM systems which would get them below 4 or 5 seconds unless they put a lot of infrastructure behind it, right? So a lot of database server, especially, and architecture, and of course the cost of running that becomes very, very high compared to a solution like ours, which is much cheaper to run because it all runs on serverless architecture, right? So yeah, it is something we think would be a big advantage for us, and we actually hoping to be able to start posting average numbers from production at some point next year, right? So we can actually use that as information for the market.
Okay. In terms of automation, what I can see is crucially important, especially in terms of short-term trading. You need to have near real-time position management features. So as a trader, I want to see what is my position in any hour, any 15-minute, any market, any product, etc. And I heard from you event-driven architecture. So it sounds like you have all the basic ingredients to have a real-time position management feature. But maybe tell us more about that.
Yeah, what we did was we embedded streaming analytics again from Microsoft into our software, right? So that while the algos can go and listen to the same stream of trades, right? We can, of course, we also build a solution to do that and show the position inside the application, right? Which basically is streaming analytics. It gets each new event gets pushed into that engine, right? Update the position real time, and basically gives you a position on the screen as quickly as the algo would get it, pretty much. So that we've done that to provide that sort of feature to the customers.
Okay, understood. And
do it inside or outside, basically.
Yeah. Talking about the algos again, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that you wouldn't really share strategies or build strategies for the client, that you share them. But are you planning maybe on your roadmap to build certain development frameworks purely for strategy development, or backtesting framework for backtesting strategies? At least I can see that the market in some areas is really moving towards building more and more own strategies, but in a structured and sustainable way.
Yeah, but actually, again, so we would provide framework to allow people to build their own things, right? But we don't want to build it, right? We much rather want specialist companies build these sort of features and functions, right? To basically backtest, backtest VAR models or backtest algos or whatever it is, right? But we don't
So-
think we're the right people to do that, so we can
So
other people do that instead.
you would leave the building the backtesting framework also to the client, not do the
Yes,
backtesting
correct.
itself, but the framework also. Okay, understood.
Anything we can build it into our framework that helps multiple people will do, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
we don't want to build a specific framework for this, right?
Okay.
It's little because people use different stacks as well, right? Some people do Python or does whatever and try to use different other tools to do it, right? And it's very hard to build something that will be one size fits all, I believe, right? So
Yeah, yeah, understood. Maybe then from the whole topic automation from a client's point of view. I mean, I heard you talking about client engagement in that context. So, what is, from your point of view, the biggest challenge when it comes to automation now, from a client point of view? Maybe not from a technology point of view, but more from a market point of view.
it depends on the client, right? Well, the biggest challenge in terms of how you get it implemented or how you do it, right? Because of course you can do it different ways. If you have a legacy system, you need to use robotics or something like that to put on top to automate things, right? If you go with a more modern solution, you expect that to come out of the box, right? So kind of the solution we're doing at the moment with our latest customers, basically intraday day ahead power, right? Where you want to create the whole matching, settlement matching, invoicing stuff against the exchange fully automatically, right? So basically, trades come in every day, they get pushed over to the position engine, trades get settled, matched up automatically, and invoices are created and sent over to SAP via an automated interface, right? So basically, if there are no exceptions, there are no humans involved at all. That's the whole point of doing that, right? And getting to that sort of level. Of course, there's a human element of that, but people are afraid of losing their jobs, right? On the other hand, those resources can be utilized in way more value added places, right? And if you look at some of the bigger companies, right, there's big differences in terms of how many people you need in back office, depending on who you are, what systems you have in place, right? There's extreme gaps, right? Or extreme differences, right? From even if you trade the same number of trades, just because you don't have modern enough systems in place to do things.
So we've gone a pretty full journey about bits of your technology. What you said early in the conversation is you started at the edge and you've kind of backfilled into more legacy features and functionality. So where are you on that journey? How complete is your system?
Well, it's getting pretty good, right? So if you take the geo side, I think there we've pretty much feature complete for what we want. There's still a few things we want to do around geo matching to improve that further. On the power side, we pretty much have everything we need there. We just went live with FTRs and spread options actually last week. So that was good. That was a new thing we wanted to put in, right? Other than that, we would go to new markets and things. There'll be more things we want to do there. But other than that, it's pretty much functionalities there for what needs to be, right? On the gas side, there we still have a bit of stuff to do around valuation, around unbundled capacity, right? So when you have unbundled or three-way borders, where you have multiple ways you can go with the capacity, there's still some stuff to do there. There's still stuff to do around gas storage. But beyond that, we are getting to a relatively good place. So I think we'll be kind of where we want to be towards next summer. Then we should be pretty much feature complete for most of the European energy market for power and gas and certificates as they look currently, right? And then from there, we will start looking at US functionality and those sort of things next year.
Awesome. So Martin, before we go into our next section, the speed round, do you have any final questions?
Yes, I just heard you saying one comment, US market. So, so far I would have assumed that your footprint is mainly in Europe, which might be true or not,
It
but
is.
maybe you can tell us more about your location
Well, the US side of
targets.
things is basically, yeah, we getting pulled there by customers, right? So basically,
That's nice.
basically, yeah, that's how it is, right? So some of our existing European customers already have business in the US or will start trading in the US, and of course, when that happens, then they need functionality from the US as well, right? So we kind of being driven that way. We wanted to do it anyways, right? This just happens a little bit sooner than we planned. Like many things, so it happens to us that way. So yeah, that's really the driver, right? It's basically being able to supply functionality to existing customers, and of course later on then start looking at building more stuff in the US as well, right? But yeah,
Okay,
that's
thank
what's
you.
getting us there.
Awesome. Well, I think based on the time, we're going to switch gears and go into our speed round. For the audience who've been listening to this series so far, this is where we ask every vendor the same 10 questions. We're going to alternate back and forth between Martin and I, and they're just short answers, just to answer what they are. So just to give you a feel, I'll go ahead and kick off, and then we'll just dive in. So will the number of vendors for ETRM solutions shrink or expand in the future, in your opinion?
Expand.
Maybe you can expound on why you think that.
Well, because I think the product coverage will also expand, right? I think as you get into more and more things you call ETRM or CTRM, right? There'll be more and more commodities. There'll be new commodities like hydrogen, right? You'll have device trading go up. You'll have way more need for these sort of products, right? Down to smaller customer level, right? So I think there's a need across the board. You see that from tier 2 and so forth, right? All industrials suddenly have to have some sort of solution to maintain their CO2 quotas and the GOs and so on and so forth, right? And of course, for that reason, the demand will be bigger, and because the demand is bigger, there'll also be more vendors.
Okay.
Second question. How many deals per minute must a modern ETRM system today be capable to import?
10,000, I'd say.
Okay. What commodity types and energy types are you offering, and which ones would you say are your biggest strength?
Well, we offer GOs, EUAs, power and gas, right? I think our biggest range is the GOs, because that's where we started, right? That's the short answer at least, yeah.
Okay. Do you offer a real-time position management module? And in case yes, does that work real-time, so event-driven?
As I said before, yes.
Okay.
Do you have an automated workflow for straight-through processing?
Yeah, we do. We have a whole workflow model that we built, and again, event-driven, right? So depends on what there's a trade status workflow where you can customize your own stuff, or you can utilize the event-driven framework to build more functionality that you want to build, right? And of course, also be able to integrate different workflows, right? Because you might as well have a nomination workflow, a regulatory reporting workflow, a confirmation workflow, and so on and so forth that you want to integrate and build across the different workflows, right? So that's functionality is out of the box, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Can your ETM solution or one of your modules price Asian options?
Our solution cannot, but you can via an app. So there is a place in the code where you can hook in your app to value that. Typically, I would probably use Triple Wakeman or something like that to value that, right? I traded some of these things in the past, but yeah, there is a
Wow,
to utilize an option model to do that via an app.
So you even mentioned the model Turnbull Wakeman. Wow. Okay, cool. Thanks.
There's an error in the original model, but yeah.
All right. So are you offering full integration and implementation services for your ETRM solution?
We are, but we try to get partners to do it as well, right? To expand the footprint and make sure that customers are not fully dependent on us, right? I think one of our missions has always been to create vendor independence, right? We don't want people to just be dependent on us. So we also want partners to provide this sort of service. We have some partners already who's doing that to a certain extent.
Okay. Now coming to a question where some of our guests have to think a little bit longer. So what is the biggest threat from your point of view for third-party ETRM providers, if there is any threat?
The biggest threat? I think actually the biggest threat at the moment, the thing that worries me the most, if you take it that way, is really IT security things, right? At least we've seen that a few times recently in this industry where people have been hit by various attacks, right? So Vestas the other week or last week was down in Denmark, right? I believe I saw somewhere that Kistas was having a lot of problems with cyber attacks, right? Which of course is terrible. So at least to me at the moment, that's the biggest threat. That's the one that scares me the most, right? Of course, we do everything we can. We have external security companies to help us with that sort of stuff, right? But still, that's something that's terrible for anybody. I really feel sorry for the companies who gets hurt by it.
But maybe to elaborate a bit more on that, because that really triggers my interest. I would actually assume this is a threat then for the your users, so the companies using your system. But why do you think is it a threat for you and third party ETRM providers?
Well, it's good for us, right? Because if our system suddenly doesn't work, that kills our business, right? The reputational damage or something that can have
Okay.
is very high, right?
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. So, how does your licensing model look today, and is it likely to evolve or change in the future?
Yeah, well, we try to do things new all the time, right? But yeah, at the moment it's all per user license, basically on a monthly or quarterly or whatever subscription basis, right? That's how we do it at the moment. It might well change, right? Depending on what customers want and how we add more value. We have models where we look at how many users logged in, for example, rather than just per user model, right? It really depends on the size of the customer and which sort of business they're in, right? Will that change? Maybe, but let's see what comes out and what the needs are from the customer side, right? Because I think looking forward, you'll have less users essentially, right? Because you have more automation going on, so you have the issues with the software. So either you need a higher per user price, or you need to basically have an enterprise type licenses instead, right?
Okay. Great. So last question: are you offering an API, and what is the key technology behind it?
We everything is APIs, right? So everything is built in REST APIs, right? So it's basically with JSON payload across the board, right? The technology behind this is Azure Functions is set in C#, right? So pretty standard stuff, essentially, all built on the Microsoft platform.
Okay, fantastic.
Well, cool. So we've been through the segments of the show. Perhaps you want to take just a moment to bring it all together, give you a minute or two to kind of summarize up what you would love our audience to know about Previse Systems.
Well, I think kind of as a summary, right? We're kind of a young company, right? But with a lot of experience, right? We've been around this market for a long time, and our mission here is to build better and cheaper software, right? That adds more value to our customers, right? I always say to people that the only thing that makes people pay us is if we ensure that they make money, right? So our job is to ensure that the customers get a competitive edge and that they can make money themselves, because of course if they do that, they are also more likely to pay us our fees, right? So that's our view of the world. That's what we try to do, right? And as mentioned before, we have a few building blocks in terms of performance, usability, and the whole framework around ecosystem, right? That's basically what we structure our software from the get-go, right? So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for participating. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And
thank you, Asbjørn.
For our audience, this concludes this episode of Insider's Guide to Energy ETRM Educational Mini-Series. If you haven't been tracking the series, there's episodes with many vendors to listen to. Go ahead and dive in. Look at us at insidersguidetoenergy.com. You'll find a page which has all the vendors listed. You can compare and contrast and hear what every vendor has to say. We look forward to seeing you on another episode, and thank you for your time today.